The most dangerous dog in the Canadian Armed Forces had just put a third handler in the infirmary, and Major Declan Rowe was running out of options. The Belgian Malinois stood in the center of the outdoor training compound at CFB Petawawa, trembling, not with exhaustion, but with something far worse. His lips were pulled back from teeth that had already torn through 2-bite sleeves and the forearm of a corporal who'd made the mistake of reaching for his collar. His official designation was K912, call sign Wraith. The name fit. He moved like smoke, struck like lightning, and left damage in his wake that no one could explain or predict. Corporal Theo Viant was the fourth handler assigned to Wraith in 7 months. He was young, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of quiet competence that had earned him top marks at the military working dog unit in Edmonton. He'd handled aggressive dogs before. He'd worked with traumatized rescues. He'd never encountered anything like this. The dog wasn't aggressive in the way Viant understood aggression. There was no dominance display, no territorial posturing. Wraith would be calm one moment, almost eerily so, and then something would shift behind those amber eyes and he'd come apart. Not attacking, fleeing, except there was nowhere to flee inside a fenced compound, so the flight response turned inward, became chaos, became teeth and claws and a high-pitched keening sound that raised the hair on every arm within earshot. Viant had the lead wrapped twice around his fist. His boots dug trenches in the gravel as Wraith lunged sideways, snapping at nothing, at the air, at ghosts that only he could see. The young corporal's jaw was set. He wouldn't let go. He'd promised himself that. But the dog weighed 32 kilograms of pure corded muscle and fear, and physics was winning. Major Rowe stood at the edge of the compound with his arms crossed, watching the spectacle with an expression that had gone past frustration into something colder. He was a precise man. He believed in systems, in protocols, in the mechanical reliability of well-trained assets. Wraith represented a failure of all three, and Rowe did not tolerate failure, least of all in front of visiting brass from Ottawa, who were arriving in 48 hours to assess the K9 program he'd spent 2 years building. "Get him to the post," Rowe called out, his voice flat, clipped. "Tie him off and let him settle." It wasn't a suggestion. Viant knew it. He began working the dog toward the tie-out post, each step a negotiation between his strength and the animal's panic. The dog's claws scraped on concrete. His breathing was ragged, shallow, the panting of an animal drowning on dry land. None of them noticed the man by the fence. He stood on the far side of the perimeter, near the maintenance road where a battered pickup truck was parked with its tailgate down. He wore canvas work pants, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a pair of steel-toed boots caked with dried mud. A ball cap from a Renfrew County feed store sat low on his forehead, shading eyes that missed nothing. His hands were rough, scarred across the knuckles, and he held a pair of fencing pliers loosely at his side as though he'd forgotten he was carrying them. His name on the base contractor manifest was listed as Silas Breton. General maintenance, fencing, small engine repair, carpentry. He'd held the contract for nearly 2 years, showing up twice a week in his old Ford, doing his work quietly, efficiently, and leaving without conversation. The administrative staff liked him because he never overcharged. The MPs at the gate liked him because he always had his ID ready and never lingered. He was part of the furniture. Invisible in the way that only truly unremarkable people can be, except that Silas Breton was not unremarkable, and he had not chosen this particular maintenance contract by accident. He watched the dog. He'd been watching for months, actually, in the peripheral way of a man who had trained himself never to stare, never to draw attention, never to let his interest show. He'd seen Wraith cycle through handlers. He'd heard the distant sounds of the dog's distress carrying across the base on still evenings. He'd told himself it wasn't his business. He'd told himself the promise he'd made was to a different life, a life that had been surgically removed from him along with his name, his rank, and his history. But watching Viant being dragged across the gravel, watching the dog's eyes roll white with terror, watching Rowe's jaw tighten with the particular frustration of a man about to make a decision he couldn't take back, Silas felt something shift in his chest. A lock turning, a door opening that he'd spent years sealing shut. He set the fencing pliers on the tailgate. He removed his work gloves one finger at a time and placed them beside the pliers. Then he walked toward the compound gate. His stride was measured, not slow, not fast. There was a quality to the way he moved that didn't belong to a 63-year-old handyman. His weight was centered, his footfalls nearly silent on the gravel, and his hands hung loose and open at his sides in the manner of a man who had long ago learned that relaxed hands were faster than tense ones. "Sir," a young master corporal stepped into his path, one hand raised. "You can't come through here. Live training area, authorized personnel only." Silas didn't stop. Sir, I need you to." He walked past the soldier as if the man were a fence post, not with rudeness, but with the kind of absolute, unhesitating purpose that made the younger man momentarily forget he was supposed to physically block him. By the time the master corporal recovered and reached for his radio, Silas was already inside the compound. Rowe saw him, recognized the maintenance contractor. Confusion flickered across his face, followed immediately by anger. "Breton, what the hell are you doing? Get out of my compound." Silas didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the dog. Wraith had stopped lunging. The trembling remained, but the frantic movement had ceased. The dog's head was up, ears forward, nostrils flaring. Something had changed in the air, some current of scent or energy that cut through the fog of his panic. His body went rigid, not with fear, but with concentration. Vaillant felt the lead go slack for the first time in 20 minutes. He didn't understand why. He looked at the old man walking toward them and felt a sudden irrational urge to step back. "Rowe." Silas spoke the major's name without rank, without deference. It was the voice of a man who was done pretending. "Tell your handler to drop the lead. Like hell I will. That dog will. He won't." Silas stopped walking. He was 10 meters from the dog. Close enough. He could smell the animal now, the sharp tang of stress hormones and unwashed fur, and underneath it, beneath the layers of neglect and terror, something achingly familiar. "He won't hurt anyone. He's not trying to hurt anyone. He never was." Rowe took a step forward. "Mr. Breton, you have 3 seconds to." Silas dropped to one knee, not the careful, creaking descent of an aging man, but a controlled, fluid motion that spoke of thousands of repetitions. He placed both hands flat on his thighs, palms up, and he breathed, just breathed. Slow and steady, the rhythm of a man who had once used that same breathing to steady a rifle, to slow his heart rate in a hide, to stay alive when everything around him was dying. Then he said the word, Kodiak. No, that wasn't right. Kodiak was the call sign, the official designation. What he said was something older, something private, a word that had never appeared in any file or report. A word spoken only in the dark, in the mountains, in the blood-soaked snow of a valley that didn't exist on any unclassified map. Kodie. The dog made a sound that none of them had ever heard from him before. It wasn't a bark or a growl or the thin, tortured whine they'd grown accustomed to. It was a sob. There was no other word for it. A deep, shuddering exhalation that seemed to empty the animal of everything he'd been carrying, every mile of confusion and loss and silent, uncomprehending grief. Wraith sat, not because he was commanded to. He sat because his legs simply gave way beneath the weight of recognition. His tail moved, once, twice, a hesitant, disbelieving thump against the gravel. Vaillant let go of the lead. He didn't decide to. His fingers just opened. Later he would say that he felt like he was intruding on something sacred, something that had nothing to do with him or the military or training protocols or any of the structures he'd been taught to believe in. Silas didn't move. He waited. His palms stayed open. His breathing stayed even. But his eyes, those pale, steady eyes that had watched the dog for months from behind the safety of a contractor's anonymity, were bright with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. The dog stood. He took one step. Another. The lead dragged behind him in the gravel, forgotten. His movement was tentative, each step a question. His nose worked the air, pulling in the scent of this man, this impossible man who couldn't be here because he was dead, because the world had ended on a mountainside and nothing since then had made any sense until this exact moment. Wraith reached Silas and pressed his face into the old man's chest. The sound the dog made was almost human, a long, wavering cry of relief and accusation, and love so fierce it hurt to witness. His body shook. He pushed harder against the man, trying to burrow into him, to merge with the only fixed point in a universe that had been spinning without an axis for years. Silas wrapped his arms around the dog. His hands found the old scars without searching, the raised ridge along the left shoulder, the puckered divot behind the ear, the place where the fur grew in a different direction over healed shrapnel wounds. He knew everyone. He'd been there when they were made. He bent his head until his face was buried in the dog's neck, and he held on. The compound was silent. 12 soldiers, trained to respond to any threat with immediate, decisive action, stood motionless, watching a 63-year-old handyman hold a dog and cry. Major Rowe's anger had evaporated. What replaced it was something more uncomfortable. The dawning realization that he was standing at the edge of a story far larger and far older than anything in his neat, orderly world. He looked at the old man's hands, really looked at them for the first time. The scars, the specific, precise way his fingers moved. The calluses that weren't from fencing pliers or engine work, but from something else entirely. "Who are you?" Rowe asked. The command was gone from his voice. What remained was something closer to awe. Silas didn't answer immediately. He was murmuring to the dog, words too low for anyone else to catch. Private things, old promises, the small sacred language that exists only between two beings who have walked through the worst of the world together and come out breathing on the other side. Finally, he looked up. "I'm the man who trained him," he said. "I'm the man who lost him, and I'm the man he's been looking for." Rowe opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. He was not a stupid man. He knew what JTF-2 was. He knew that some personnel disappeared into classified operations so deep that their own families believed cover stories. He knew that records were sealed, identities scrubbed, lives quietly dismantled and rebuilt in the interest of national security. He just hadn't expected to find one of those ghosts fixing his fences. "Viant," Rowe said, without looking away from the old man and the dog. "My office. Bring K912's complete file." The file was thin, embarrassingly thin for a dog that had cost the Department of National Defense over $200,000 in acquisition, training, veterinary care, and handler medical bills. It listed his breed, his physical specifications, his training scores, which were extraordinary, and his behavioral assessments, which read like a horror novel. 3 pages of clinical language describing an animal that excelled at every physical task and failed catastrophically at the one thing that mattered, trusting a human being. The transfer paperwork was a single page. Previous unit, redacted. Previous handler, redacted. Reason for transfer, medical separation of handler. Notes, classified. Authorization. A signature block so heavily blacked out that only the departmental code remained, and Rowe recognized it. CC. Communications Security Establishment. The intelligence branch. "This dog came from the intelligence community," Rowe said, leaning back in his chair. "Not from another regiment. From CEAS?" Viant stood at attention across the desk, still processing what he'd seen in the compound. "Sir, I've handled him for 4 months. He's never responded to anyone. Not a treat, not a command, not anything. That man said one word and, 'I know what happened, Corporal.'" Rowe stared at the redacted page. "What I don't know is who Silas Breton actually is or why a classified intelligence asset ended up in my K9 program with his history erased." He picked up his phone and called the base intelligence officer. Then the provost marshal. Then, when neither could tell him anything useful, he made a call to Ottawa that he knew would set off alarms in places he couldn't see. The callback came at 2200 hours from a number with no caller ID, Major Rowe. The voice was female, controlled, and carried the particular flatness of someone who had learned to strip all emotion from professional communication. "You've been making inquiries about a K9 asset and a civilian contractor. I have questions that need answers, ma'am. Your questions have been noted. The answers are above your clearance level. You are directed to cease all inquiries into the background of K912 and the individual known as Silas Breton." Rowe gripped the phone. "With respect, ma'am, I have an uncontrolled animal on my base and a civilian who appears to have an unexplained classified connection to that animal. That's a security concern." A pause, then softer. "Major, I'm going to tell you something that I'm not authorized to tell you, because I think you deserve to understand what you're dealing with. The man you know as Silas Breton served this country for 26 years in capacities that will never be acknowledged. He gave everything. His name, his career, his family connections, his health, everything. 6 years ago, he was extracted from an operation in the Sahel region that went catastrophically wrong. His team did not survive. His partner, the dog, was reported killed in action. Breton was given a new identity and resettled. The dog, it turned out, survived. He was recovered by French forces, repatriated, and transferred into your program under a new designation. No one connected the two because no one was supposed to. Breton was supposed to be dead to the system, and the dog was supposed to be a fresh start." The line was quiet for a moment. Rowe could hear the woman breathing. "It didn't work," she continued. "The dog never adjusted because he wasn't malfunctioning. He was grieving. And Breton, I suspect, took that maintenance contract because he heard rumors. Because he's the kind of man who doesn't stop looking. Rowe sat in the dark of his office, the phone pressed to his ear, and felt the full weight of what he'd stumbled into settle across his shoulders. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "I want you to do the right thing, Major. Whatever you decide that is." The line went dead. Rowe didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table in base housing, drinking coffee that went cold, staring at the wall, turning the problem over and over. By morning, he'd made his decision. It wasn't a military decision, it was a human one. He drove off base past the town of Petawawa, down a county road that wound through stands of white birch and jack pine until he reached a small property set back from the road. The house was modest. Vinyl siding, a covered porch, a vegetable garden that was almost aggressively well maintained, a barn that had been converted into a workshop, the doors open, the sound of a radio playing CBC drifting out into the morning air. He found Silas in the workshop, sharpening a chisel on a whetstone. The dog was lying on a folded moving blanket beside the workbench, his head on his paws, watching the door. When Rowe appeared, the dog lifted his head and a low rumble started in his chest. Not aggressive, watchful. Silas didn't look up from the whetstone. "You found the place. It wasn't hard. You're in the phone book. Some covers work better when they're simple." Silas tested the chisel's edge against his thumbnail, nodded in satisfaction, and set it down. He looked at Rowe for the first time. "I expect you've had a phone call. I've had several, and you're here anyway." Rowe pulled over a stool and sat without being invited. The dog watched him but didn't growl again. Silas had placed a hand on the animal's back, and the contact was enough. The trust was absolute and immediate. "I need to understand something," Rowe said. "That dog has been in my program for 14 months. He's injured 3 handlers. He's destroyed equipment. He's failed every evaluation. Every expert we've brought in says he's unsalvageable. And you walk in and say a word and he turns into a different animal." He didn't turn into a different animal. He turned back into himself. Rowe absorbed that. "Tell me about the Sahel." Silas was quiet for a long time. His hand moved in slow circles on the dog's back, and the animal's eyes half closed in contentment. Outside, a blue jay screamed at something in the pines. "Four-man team," Silas said finally. His voice had changed. The folksy rural cadence was gone, replaced by something more precise, more clipped. The voice beneath the cover. "Deep reconnaissance. We were tracking weapons shipments moving through northern Mali. Kodie was our tracker, Belgian Malinois, trained from 8 weeks. I raised him. He could detect explosive compounds at 200 meters, track a human scent trail across rock, and he could tell the difference between a farmer carrying fertilizer and a fighter carrying TATP. He was the best I ever worked with." He paused. His hands stilled on the dog's back. "The ambush was textbook. They'd been watching us for days. We walked into a wadi and they closed both ends. Denham was the first to go down, then Prue, then Lacasse. I took rounds in the vest and shrapnel in the leg. Kodie was beside me. He'd been hit too, left shoulder, but he wouldn't leave. When they advanced on our position, Silas stopped. His jaw worked. The dog, sensing the shift in his handler's body, lifted his head and pressed his nose against Silas's wrist. He charged them. Not because he was commanded to. I didn't give any command. He just went. 30 kilograms against 6 armed men. He bought me maybe 90 seconds. 90 seconds was enough for the QRF helo to get overhead. They pulled me out. I was told later that they found him in the wadi, still breathing, still positioned between me and where the fighters had been. They stabilized him in the field and evacuated him to the French medical facility in Gao. But they told you he was dead. They told me a lot of things, that my cover was blown, that the network we'd been tracking had put a price on me, that I needed to disappear. They gave me a new name, moved me here, set me up with the contractor credentials. The dog, they said, didn't survive his injuries. I believed them because I needed to believe something, and because I was in a hospital bed in Landstuhl with a morphine drip and a psychologist telling me it was time to let go. Rowe looked at the dog. Kodie looked back at him, amber eyes calm and alert, tail giving a single slow wag as if acknowledging the major's presence without quite endorsing it. "How did you find out he was alive?" Silas almost smiled. "Almost. I didn't find out. I heard something. 8 months ago, I was doing a fence repair on the south side of the base, near the K9 compound. I heard a dog screaming. Not barking, screaming, and I knew that sound. I knew it the way you know your own mother's voice in a crowded room. I told myself I was imagining things, old man going soft. But I started finding reasons to work near the compound. I'd see him sometimes through the fence, and every time I saw him, I was more certain. The way he moved, The scars. The way he'd cock his head when a helicopter passed overhead. That was his tell. He used to do that in the field, tracking the sound of incoming rotors. You waited 8 months? I waited because I was afraid. The admission came out raw, unvarnished. Afraid I was wrong. Afraid I was right and it would blow my cover. Afraid of what it would mean if I let that door open again. I've spent 6 years building a life where I don't feel anything major, where I get up, do my work, come home, and don't think about a Waddy and Molly or the sound of my team dying. Kodie is the key to every locked room in my head. I knew that if I touched him, if I let him back in, all of it would come back. Every night I couldn't sleep. Every morning I didn't want to wake up. He looked at Ro with clear, unflinching eyes. But yesterday I watched your handler getting dragged through the gravel, and I watched that dog's eyes, and I couldn't do it anymore. He wasn't looking for a handler. He was looking for me. He's been looking for me for 6 years, and I've been standing on the other side of a fence, letting him suffer, because I was too much of a coward to face my own past. The workshop was very quiet. The CBC radio murmured in the background, something about weather in the Ottawa Valley, frost warnings for the weekend. Ro cleared his throat. The official position is that K912 is a DND asset. Technically, I can't just release him to a civilian contractor. I understand, however. Ro reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. I've processed his retirement, medical grounds, effective immediately. His pension and care stipend are allocated to his last registered handler, which, as of the paperwork I filed this morning, is you. He placed the envelope on the workbench. I may have exercised some creative interpretation of the regulations. Silas looked at the envelope. He didn't pick it up. His hand stayed on the dog's back. Why? Ro considered the question. He thought about the phone call, about the woman's voice telling him to do the right thing. He thought about his own career, his orderly world of protocols and assessments. He thought about the sound that dog had made in the compound, that deep shuddering sob of recognition. Because I've spent 14 months treating him like broken equipment, Ro said, trying to fix him, assign him, make him productive. And all he needed was you. I was so busy following procedure that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. He stood. There's something else. I've spoken with my chain of command. Not about your identity. I'm not that careless. I told them I'd found someone with an exceptional ability to rehabilitate working dogs. I asked if you'd consider a consulting role. Training our handlers, teaching them what you know about building a bond, not just giving commands. Silas shook his head slowly. I'm not a trainer. I'm a broken-down old man who fixes fences. Ro looked at the dog, who was now leaning his full weight against Silas's leg, eyes half closed in absolute peace. Mr. Breton, Silas, that dog went through 6 years of hell because no one understood what he needed. Your handlers, my handlers, they're good kids. Strong, dedicated. But they've been taught to treat these animals as tools. Equipment with teeth. You could show them something different. You could make sure no dogs through what Kodie went through. Silas was quiet for a long time. The dog breathed against his leg. Outside, the wind moved through the birches, and the morning light came in slanted and golden through the workshop door. I'll think about it, he said, which Ro understood was as close to a yes as this man was capable of giving. 2 weeks later, Corporal Viant arrived at Silas Breton's farm at 06:30, as instructed. He brought nothing, no leads, no training manuals, no treat pouches, no bite sleeves. Silas had told him to come empty-handed. He found the old man sitting on the porch steps, drinking coffee from a tin mug. Kodie was beside him, watching the tree line where a deer and her fawn were picking their way through the undergrowth. Sir, Viant said, standing at something that was almost attention. Don't call me sir, sit down. Viant sat. Kodie regarded him with calm interest. No growl, no tension, just assessment. You're scared of him, Silas said. It wasn't a question. No, Viant stopped. He'd been trained to never admit fear. But there was something about this man, this quiet, weathered man with the scarred hands and the still eyes, that made dishonesty feel pointless. Yes, after what happened with Martinez and Chen, yeah, I'm scared of him. Silas nodded. Good, he knows it. He's known it every time you've handled him, and it told him exactly one thing, that you didn't trust him. So why should he trust you? He set his coffee down and looked at the young corporal. The military teaches you that a working dog is a weapons system. Input, output, command, response. And that's true as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. A dog like Kodie doesn't work for commands. He works for a covenant. You protect him, he protects you. You stay steady, he stays steady. You break faith, he breaks down. He gestured at the dog. That's what happened, not a malfunction, a broken covenant. He gave everything, and the people he trusted sent him away and gave him a stranger's name. Viant looked at the dog. For the first time, he didn't see a dangerous animal. He saw something wounded and brave and desperately loyal. He saw with sudden clarity the same thing he saw every time he looked at the veterans who came back from deployment with eyes that didn't quite focus on the present anymore. "What do I need to learn?" he asked. Silas almost smiled. "Everything. We start with silence. Before you can tell a dog what to do, you need to learn what he's telling you. Sit here. Don't move. Don't talk. Just watch him. Watch his ears, his breathing, the way his weight shifts. He's been talking to you for 14 months. You just haven't been listening." Viant sat. Kodie watched him. And slowly, in the cool Ontario morning, with the mist rising off the tree line and a red-tailed hawk circling high above the river, the young soldier began to learn a language older than any command structure, older than any military doctrine, older even than the bond between soldiers. It was the language of trust spoken without words, understood only by those willing to be still enough to hear it. Over the following month, Silas Brayton walked back onto the base he'd been haunting as a ghost, and he taught. Not with lectures or manuals, but by example, by showing a room full of hardened operators that the bravest thing a handler could do was not command, but listen, that the strongest lead was no lead at all, that a dog who chose to stay was worth 100 dogs who were forced to. Kodie never wore a military designation again. He was retired, pensioned, home. But he came with Silas to every session, and the handlers would watch this old, scarred dog work beside his old, scarred partner, with a communication so seamless it looked like telepathy. No shouted commands, no corrections, just two beings who had walked through fire together and come out the other side, bound by something no file could redact, no bureaucracy could erase, and no amount of time could diminish. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the handlers had gone back to barracks, full of questions they'd never thought to ask before, Silas would sit on his porch with Kodie at his feet and listen to the wind in the white birches. And for the first time in 6 years, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like peace.